Hello there, and welcome to another Whiskey Lore Whiskey Comparison video. Drew Hannish here, and I am back from a long trip across Tennessee with a little splash into Kentucky. And my mission on this trip was to taste Tennessee whiskey and learn a little bit more about it. Now, when I say Tennessee whiskey, what do you think of? Yeah. Or maybe. Yeah. Well, there's a reason, I found out, why we associate Tennessee whiskey with those two brands. After Prohibition Tennessee didn't come straight out of Prohibition. They lingered a little bit. But Jack Daniel's was the only distillery that got a license to start up and ramp up production again. And so, talk about owning a market. They were the only distillery around for many, many years until George Dickel finally came along and they added themselves into the fray. But then Nelson Greenbrier came in. We're already now moving into the 21st century, and it's not until the late part of the first decade of the 21st century before the laws start to change in Tennessee to allow more distilleries. And so all of a sudden, you have these different areas that all have to apply to be able to loosen up their county regulations to allow them to start distilling whiskey. And now you start seeing this explosion of Tennessee whiskey distilleries. Now, what's interesting about that is that Jack Daniel's and George Dickel are both known for making Tennessee sour mash whiskey. And to make Tennessee sour mash whiskey, you have to run the whiskey through something called the Lincoln County process, which is basically taking your whiskey and putting it through charcoal filtering. And they use sugar maple at Jack Daniel's. This is really where all of that started from. So now that there's this explosion of Tennessee distilleries opening up, are they all following the lead of Jack Daniel's and George Dickel and starting to produce Tennessee sour mash whiskey? Or are they going in another direction? Well, that's what I wanted to figure out. So over the next few weeks, I'm going to be doing some tasting videos on some different whiskeys across Tennessee. And I'm going to start today in East Tennessee. Now, just to give you kind of an idea here before we get started, when I planned this trip out, I was using this guide that I had picked up, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, maybe a year ago. And so I did all my planning off of this and then used Google Maps to try to find some more. Well, there's 24 distilleries on this. By the time I started doing my trip this past week, I had to pick up a new copy because now there are 37 plus. I love the plus. That means keep watching because more are coming. So definitely a lot more going on in Tennessee these days. But one thing growing up or living around Asheville, North Carolina, and thinking about what's on the other side of the mountain in Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge is that we also hear a lot about moonshine. And of course, when you initially think of moonshine, you think about that stuff that was, basically take it straight off the still, high proof, basically clean anything around the house with it because that stuff is just gonna, But if you go to Pigeon Forge or Gatlinburg or out in the country, you start finding these moonshines that are 80 proof, 40% alcohol, and they've got different flavorings in them. And sometimes they're 70 proof or 60 proof. I've even seen them at 50 proof. So I was a little worried when I started planning this trip out that that's what I was going to find. A lot of moonshine, because that seems to be when I go on my drive from South Carolina up north and I go through Tennessee, I just see moonshine, 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 moonshine. And I have nothing against moonshine. I'm just not a big fan of it. Moonshine is doing what beer is started doing in trying to infuse flavors. And the thing I love about whiskey is that you can sit with a bottle and you can just enjoy it, and you can pick out your own flavors, note your own things, and everybody comes up with something a little bit different. So that's what I really, really was hoping I was going to find in Tennessee, and I'll unveil a lot of this as we roll along through the next few tasting videos. So two whiskeys that we're going to be looking at today are both from Eastern Tennessee. And the first one we're looking at here is Junction 35. So a railroad theme going on in the restaurant. This is actually made in the back of a restaurant. So you can go in, have a nice dinner, and I don't know that they particularly do tours. You can kind of see everything through the window. And so you got a chance to do some tasting, some sampling there. It's in Pigeon Forge, so if you're going to Dollywood or you're going to see the Titanic or the upside down house thing or building thing they got going on there, Wonder Works or something it's called, then you can drive one road back and you're going to find Junction 35. So we're going to taste this whiskey. This is actually, both of these actually are MGP. If you don't know about MGP is a distillery in Indiana. It's been around for 170 or so years. It's been owned by multiple people, but they basically are where a lot of new distilleries will get their juice from to make their whiskey. And so, and big guys have done it too. Bulleit, George Dickel have all used juice from MGP to make some of their products. Ryes are apparently a little bit difficult to make, so a lot of times ryes will be sourced from there. Bulleit was one that sourced their rye from MGP. Diageo is a big user of MGP product. So, you know the juice in here is going to be good. The question is, how different is it going to be? And my other question is always, once the distillery starts to produce their own juice, will they try to keep the same mash bill that they were having produced at MGP and running through different types of stills? Will it change? All big questions. So we're going to taste these right now. They could change and probably will change to a certain extent. So this is a more wheated version of, this is the more wheated mash bill for MGP. Not sure of the numbers. But it's a really interesting, because I smelled this yesterday and I was like, man, I get some, the first thing that came to mind was kind of like foresty. It's got some kind of, it's not pine, it just has the smells of a forest. There's a little heat, maybe a little campfire in there. It's not peaty, but it just, something is warm on the nose. And then I get this thing where my mother used to do crafts, and we used to go into these craft stores, and they had this, like all of this mossy stuff, and it gave off kind of a certain smell. It was dried, mossy stuff. That's the smell I get out of this. It's very interesting. So the flavor kind of stays consistent there. I don't know. It has a little bit of a bite to it. It's still got a little herbaliness to it. Maybe some grain is what I'm tasting in there. But the finish is a little disappointing. It kind of goes into this bitter char wood thing. And yeah, I keep hoping something else will come out of it. It seems like there's some kind of dark fruit there in the background, but it's kind of dominated by the char bitterness on the finish. So it's good juice. I just for my palate, it's probably not hitting me 100%. But like I say, if those if you like that kind of dried mossy smell, it's definitely worth sticking your nose in the bottle and seeing. And it's got a very nice label on it. All right, so this is S.E. Callahan's, and this is made by Tennessee Hills Distillery, which is in Jonesborough. Jonesborough, Tennessee is, I think it's the oldest town in Tennessee. Don't quote me on that one. It used to be the capital of the state of Franklin, and there's a whole story surrounding that one that we'll probably get into in a whiskey lore episode at some point. So this one is interesting on the nose because it gives me a banana, like a banana nut bread kind of thing. Some baking spices. And this is a high rye, and I get a little bit of that rye smell in there. It's a little darker. This is a 2-year-old. This is a 3-year-old. I'd like to see what happens with this one if it spends more time in the barrel because, in fact, if I get one of those little barrel kits, I might put some of that in there and see how it does because, to me, wheated bourbons tend to do better once they are in that barrel for a longer time. So this one goes to citrus for me. There's like grapefruit, orange rind, because there's a bitter that kind of rides in there. Wait for it. Right on the finish, you get this espresso flavor. Now, this is where people have laughed at me for this, but I used to say when I'm driving down the road, I'm like, man, it smells like espresso beans. Why does it smell like espresso beans? And it would just happen every once in a while. One day, somebody was riding in the car with me, and I said that, and they went, "That's a skunk." I was like, oh, I never thought espresso beans and skunk would be close to each other, but so there's a little skunk in this. Got a little espresso bean thing going on there. So both of these are bourbons. This is a high rye, 3-year, and Junction 35 is a 2-year wheated. And again, it's going to be interesting to see what both of these distilleries do. If I'm going back to grab a bottle, I'm probably going back to grab this one because it hits my flavor profile a little better. I love the banana. I love the citrus that comes in on this. And I even like, and I do actually really like that little hint of coffee, of espresso that pops in on the finish. And of course, I knew you guys probably wouldn't know either of these two whiskeys, so that's why in the voting, I was more like, which bottle's design do you like better? Which label hits you better? Now notice they're both bourbons. They're straight bourbon whiskeys. They can't be Tennessee straight bourbon whiskeys because they came from Indiana originally. But you guys voted 70% to 30% for this label. And I'm with you. I like the train motif here, and go enjoy some food. If you're in Pigeon Forge, I would definitely stop off at Junction 35. I think that as they grow and develop, they now have all their own equipment in there. They're making their own rums, they're making their own vodkas and all that, but they are also making their own bourbon, and so it'll be fun to see what happens with them. As for Tennessee Hills, it's a beautiful building. It's really worth going to see. It's small, but really nicely appointed, and the distillery equipment is all in the back, and it's family owned. It's a really, really nice experience. And hint, hint, they are working on a potential bigger facility and a whole new experience in Johnson City. So stay tuned for that too. They are one to watch moving forward. So I hope this video has been helpful for you, and hopefully, maybe if you're in Tennessee, you'll see these in stores somewhere. But things could be coming from these, and we'll check out more Tennessee distilleries in a future episode.